Alright, so basically the title explains it all. I was really shocked that this wasn't covered by a number of YouTubers who I subscribe to, but it wasn't, so I felt I needed to make a video. But yeah, man, let's talk about Richard Stallman and why his position on the poke juxtaposed with his position on freedom more generally is entirely hypocritical. So, for those of you who don't know, which is probably no one watching this video, but if you don't know, Richard is the founder of the Free Software Foundation. He's behind the GNU Project. He's, if not the most important person with respect to Linux or GNU/Linux, he's the second most important person, right? And that's not really up for debate. I don't really think many people would argue with that. So, and, Richard, unlike Linus, I would say, is extremely ideological, right? A lot of people have referred to Richard even as a philosopher, right? It's some insight into the state of philosophy in the 21st century, but I digress. He throughout the years, has held, generally speaking, a very consistent position on freedom, right, and privacy. He's been a staunch advocate of freedom and privacy, and even outside of the digital realm. And that's why that's important here, right? Because this does not cover his expertise, right? Obviously, Richard is not a doctor or a medical doctor. He's not a virologist or anything like that. But he's also not an expert on public policy. But in the past, he has spoken out very explicitly in favor of freedom and privacy on issues where he's not an expert. Okay, so what is Richard's position on this, on the mandatory pokes, right? So there's been some really extreme stuff out there. I'm just going to go with what's on his blog. Okay, so I'm just going to read it to you now. Okay, so this is what he has to say, and this is regarding, I think, the protests in New Zealand. And some of it's kind of stupid, but basically, it's everyone's all of it's stupid, but anyway, it's everyone's duty to help protect the rest from the thing. Letting this violent hatred stew will encourage them to get more violent. I suggest that the government adopt a policy that whenever they arrest someone, they use that opportunity to vaccinate per as well. Once anti-vaxxers see the vaccination is not bad for them, they will find it hard to keep the hate going. I'll link that below if anybody wants to read it themselves. Obviously, I did make a little edit there just so we don't get flagged on YouTube. But so yes, I censored Richard. But yeah, I think the meaning behind it is quite obvious, right? Essentially advocating for in certain situations mandatory vaccinations, right? So why is this problematic, right? Well, let's get into it, okay? Because there's a few different angles that people will try to take to defend this position. It's really not defensible. But why does it matter, right? Why does somebody who advocates for freedom also be against these type of mandates? Well, let me break it down for you, right? So the reason that your phone, right, that we think that you should have the right to do with your phone as you please, and the right to be, to have privacy away from, both government and, non-government entities, right, like Google, Facebook, etc., Apple, is that, or your computer, right, your property is an extension of the individual, okay? That's why you have rights over your property, right? That's why we have privacy within the home. You could think about castle doctrine, and that's kind of a more extreme example, right? But the home, again, is the extension of the individual, and in many cases, you could defend the home in the same way or a similar way that you could defend yourself as an individual, okay? And that's maybe people agree or disagree with it, but it really is an extension of this ownership, right, and that kind of being an extension of the individual, okay? Now here's the thing. If you don't respect the rights of the person, okay, of the individual, okay, you can't then claim to respect the rights of what the individual owns. Why? Right? Why? On what basis? It doesn't make sense, right? So the rights of the individual, of the person, are sacred, right? Those are the most important rights because all other rights to freedom and privacy extend from that, okay? So, and with respects to the rights of the individual, okay, body autonomy, right? The right that I decide what happens to my body, okay? Independent of what you think I should do, independent of what you want me to do. That is one of the most fundamental rights, which obviously Richard would advocate for. I assume he would use that exact argument advocating in favor of abortion, okay? So, and that is actually a more extreme stance than being in or against certain mandates, right? That's a more extreme sense because you're directly harming, you're causing direct harm, whereas this could be potential indirect harm, right? And that's another debate. It's not relevant though. So that's another argument though that people will use. They'll try to say, hey, well, like this is a really extreme scenario, right? Hey, we're talking about lives here, and that's true, right? We are talking about lives. And I don't want to get into a discussion of efficacy or anything like that because that's not relevant. It's not germane to this discussion here, okay? So let's say you were to say, hey, well, like, look, you know, you were talking about a pandemic. We're talking about the most extreme scenario you can get in. And yeah, is it a violation of rights? Sure, but he's trying to save lives. Okay, sure. Now, the NSA, right, the FBI, the CIA, if you were to confront them and say, hey, like, why are you spying on people? Well, what's the argument we've heard since 9/11, right? We're protecting you, right? We're saving lives. And you know what? They probably have saved lives. You know, but if you go, I know because I lived through it. I was a young man, or I was even a boy at that time. And I remember those arguments. And I remember at the time thinking that they held water, and then later maturing and realizing how pernicious they actually were. But yeah, you know, when we gave up our rights with the Patriot Act, it was under the guise of safety. And everyone felt we had to do it. Remember, 3,000 plus people died on 9/11. We didn't want that to happen again. So what did we do? We surrendered our rights. And people like Richard have tried to fight to get those rights back in spite of the potential threat to safety for the past 20 years, okay? So safety, public health, it's relevant to the discussion, but you can't infringe on the basic fundamental rights of the individual in order to curtail a potential indirect threat, right? That doesn't, it doesn't have enough weight, okay? And I think there's another argument that people have said, like, hey, well, Richard only cares about like digital privacy. Okay, so one, that's not true. He's been very outspoken about, again, we're talking about somebody who literally feels that children should be able to have sex with adults because freedom, right? Which is so profoundly silly and obnoxious. But yeah, I mean, he's far, on a lot of issues, he's far to the freedom side of me and most reasonable people. So yeah, he's spoken out on abortion, on pedophilia, in favor of both. He's, you know, obviously been, you know, he's been critical of certain nations for their suppression in print journalism, right? So, like, one, that's not true. And two, if it were, like, why would I take this person seriously? Like, you're just, like, a mega advocate for, like, digital privacy, but you don't care about, like, other forms of privacy and freedom? It's silly, okay? And yeah, I mean, it's very obvious that this is a hypocritical position. I don't think it's defensible given his ideological position on a number of other issues, or a number of other statements he's made. But you know, I mean, the best explanation I can give is that Richard is a really disgusting, obese old man, and is facing down death and is scared. So he's basically kind of backed off on a number of his principles. Anyway, that is all I got. Let me know what you think in the comments below.